Hello, this is Andrew Heaton, friend of Christoph, friend of the Eastern Border podcast, and friend to all dogs, telling you to support this program by going to patreon.com/the Eastern Border. And let me tell you why. Because they keep trying to fucking kill him. That's why. He's doing this podcast for you. And they fucking blew his car up and tried to poison him. Dear God, pay this man. Go to patreon.com/the Eastern Border. He's not going to tell you that, partly because he's eating Wendy's right now in my living room, but also, mostly, he's too humble. Not me. I'm telling you right now, this is a professional journalist. This is a war correspondent who is doing quality work that is literally dangerous, and he is not funded through some corporate stooge nor any type of large government agency. He's funded through you, the person listening right now. And so you have an obligation to go to patreon.com/the Eastern Border and make this show possible. Go to patreon.com/the Eastern Border. Thank you.
Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. Today, we're back with a friend of our show, John Michael Godier, to have a bit of a breather episode in a very dark way. Obviously, nothing is as simple as it seems on the Eastern Border. Well, welcome to the show, John. Let's talk nuclear power and all that stuff, and war in space, and oh boy, we have a lot of good topics prepared here today.
Yes, nothing like a nuclear detonation in space, which has happened.
I think sun could technically be counted as one continent.
Yes, any star could. That's a fusion reaction. But as far as a human done one, the United States had a test shot called Starfish Prime, where we actually detonated a nuclear weapon in space, and it knocked out the power grid of Honolulu.
It knocked off the power. Okay,
Yeah, it EMP'd it. it completely knocked it out, and then it sat up there glowing because it really messed with the Earth's magnetic field. And there are actually pictures of Starfish Prime that, yeah, we never did that again. Don't do that.
Meanwhile, in Russia, they're already launching their robot Fyodor up there. He's going to be armed with 2 pistols and everything. They had space pistols previously as well. Just crazy. There
is, but the move as far as anti-satellite warfare is moving to really weird stuff like circular saws in space, where you're basically chopping up satellites, which is very dangerous because you can set off Kessler syndrome and make certain areas in low Earth orbit useless because there's just so much debris, and that debris hits other debris and it just cascades, and you eventually make the orbit useless, which is why we need to not go too crazy with any sort of space warfare, because we could make certain orbits, not all of them, but certain orbits very problematic to use.
Well, talking about circular saws in space, this is a very typical thing of modern day combat evolution, because I've been watching Ukraine war, as you well know. In recent times, I saw that they're now using drones to fight other drones, because those Mavic drones who can like hover a lot in one spot and just observe the battlefield versus the FPV drones who are just much more faster and mobile, and who are usually kamikaze drones. Now they're fighting them because yesterday I saw a video of a drone fighting another drone with literally a stick, because they decided, why explode our drone? We can just as well attach a stick and just slam it into other drones' propellers from the top, because that's more convenient. You don't need to explode your drone that way. So now you have drones fighting with sticks in the air. That is some sort of a weird dystopia, and maybe, I don't know if Einstein really did say this saying that about the Fourth World War being fought with sticks. Well, the modern war, apparently in Ukraine at least, it's drones fighting the war, literally still using sticks. So hearing about circular saws on something in space does not really surprise me.
Well, the bottom line is that the stick works, and if you get into propellers or engines of any type, you throw a stick in there, you're going to follow it. So it is at least practical.
Talking about this, circular saws are one thing, but don't we have something like more high tech, like lasers or something? I thought we would have like this whole anti-satellite, anti-drone warfare figured out in a bit more advanced terms rather than stick or circular saw. But so far it seems stick, circular saw, nuclear explosion. What are the lasers?
Okay, so in the 1980s, the Reagan administration in the U.S. looked at particle beams as anti-satellite technology and tested some. Where that went now is anybody's guess. I'm sure something's there. Now, what we do know that we use is satellite blinding techniques. In other words, the U.S. Space Force has a publicly known weapon system that just blinds satellites as it passes over sensitive areas, and that's completely acknowledged and open that they do that. And I'm sure I know for a fact Russia has such a system as well, where it blinds U.S. satellites that pass over Russian territory.
How do you even blind a satellite from the Earth? Like, I thought that would be some high-tech stuff. Like, I don't know, at least in the Ukraine front when it comes to drones, they're all complaining about how people are changing their frequencies, and then about how it's difficult if you don't have the correct frequency to block the radio signals from interfering with the drones. I thought we might be doing something similar with satellites, but I understand, they're not really remote controlled via radio. They're just there and doing their programming thing.
Well, this would be speculative on my part. I'm just musing on how it could work. But a spy satellite is going to have certain limitations just by what it's doing. In other words, if your spy satellite is looking for heat plumes from a missile launch, right?
Oh, okay, yeah, that would make sense. You technically you can send like specialized stuff in there.
Yes, so you're stuck with it because you're stuck with infrared right there. That looking for a heat plume, heat is infrared radiation. So you're gonna know, if that's the purpose of the satellite, you're gonna know that if you want to blind it, you need to do something with infrared because that's what the detector is looking for.
But I just find it kind of weird because they found out about that mysterious nuclear weapons test, likely presumed to be South African/Israeli weapons test near the South Pole in those flashing lights. I mean, nuclear tests tend to be quite, shiny. I guess the special part of all these countermeasures towards satellites involves literally just blasting them straight up there with a laser or something. Because
those were the Vela detection.
Yeah, I heard about them from you. And if you haven't yet, go check out Event Horizon and John Michael Godier, both channels on YouTube. Very great. He's also really good for sleeping.
Never heard of it. Nope. Anyway, so I think how those worked, and I may be mistaken on this. I'm sure a member of the audience knows more about this than I do. But I would imagine it was looking for, a double flash of, I believe, gamma radiation. They're very characteristic, and you can't miss it because, a double flash of a hydrogen bomb is, very distinctive. And I think that's what it was looking, the Vela network was looking for, and that's what they found with that test, which nobody's ever, admitted to doing that test, but I think it's pretty widely believed to have been a joint test between South Africa and Israel. South Africa having denuclearized after, but anyway, that's what it's thought to be.
It is somewhat strange, though, that time period and all this Cold War really influenced how we do things even now, and what's happening now is really changing a lot. At least I expected more from before this war started from the bigger drones, the Reaper drones and all that stuff. But currently it seems that the FPV drones the style of drones that I use, they're seeming to be very important. All this idea that you have to be nimble with them and all these little kamikaze drones and what Ukraine is doing on the sea is also just weird. I've read a lot of speculation, especially from various war analysts, about especially Ukraine's sea drones like the Sea Baby, which are very, Ukraine has managed to defeat the Russian Black Sea Fleet basically just by using their drone operations. And this is a very shocking concept to the world of maritime power, because a nation which scuttled or destroyed most of their ships at the early war has now literally pushed out Russia from the Black Sea Equatorium. And people are just, speculating about that a bit. Is there any speculation about what could happen next, and how do we control these drones better? How could drones develop? Can we have any surprises what do you think? You after all, you are the only futurologist that I know, except Maxim Kalashnikov, but I highly doubt that he counts.
Yes, I don't think that you're going to have much luck talking to Kalashnikov at this point. Yes and no. So sometimes the simplest weapon is the best weapon, right? And the drones present a very, very simple, inexpensive way to use them as a weapon, deploy them as a weapon. I would imagine that if you really wanted to counter that, you're going to need a very dynamic system, because, look, you can take one down with a bullet or a laser, but you have to have some way to point at it. And right now, the best way to do that would be a human. And I have no doubt that people are sitting there shooting at these drones, right? They should be. But they are very fast-moving targets, and you know how that goes.
Well, they tend to use shotguns for that matter. But when they lack their anti-radio measures, then it's still good old shotguns for all this stuff. Which is just
what technology is a shotgun? I think we've had shotguns since the 18th century. So it's again, it in itself is an old technology. Now, of course, the propellant of the shotgun is 20th century, but before then it was black powder. Even you could look at something like the Napoleonic Wars, where they would literally turn cannons, smoothbore cannons into shotguns by loading them with
grape shot. Yes.
Yeah, grape shot, or canister shot, and it was black powder, but the effect was the same. And imagine what that grape shot would do to the rigging of a wooden ship, and the sails and the personnel, the crew. So they were very deadly, and it's going to work the same with a modern drone. I mean, it's going to take it down, See, a jet drone is going to be a lot different because they're moving a lot faster. But a propeller drone or something like that, a shotgun's going to do it, I would imagine. Like skeet shooting.
Apparently they're also pretty nimble, but they are shot down sometimes, really. But when we talk about all these weapons, it's just that, there's always this saying that generals always prepare for the last war. And I think that this has been the biggest impact from this war, except one thing that I left out specifically that I want to talk to you about now. Let's talk about nuclear weapons and nuclear power. Because if we look at the world today, a lot of countries, after the whole invasion happened, have started moving forwards to having their own nuclear weapons, such as Japan and especially South Korea.
Well, even murmurs from Germany on that.
And Poland, which is the biggest ally of South Korea in Europe, and they also purchase a lot of their military equipment. They might be getting one, which I find scary. I like my security, but I'm not a very much, hey, let us proliferate to everyone all the time kind of person,
Well, that was the risk, and it all lies with Vladimir Putin, really, not South Korea, but the development of nuclear weapons prompts the development of nuclear weapons. So North Korea builds a hydrogen bomb, therefore South Korea starts saying, maybe we need to counter that. And that's age old because arms races have always gone on. It makes it into an arms race, the lack of a stable order. So when there's nothing going on, countries are like, well, we might as well save the money because we don't really need the nuclear weapons. But when you have the situation with Ukraine going on, they're reconsidering that, and that drives proliferation. And as a result, the bottom line is the more active deployable nuclear weapons in the world, the more dangerous the world gets.
Yeah, and recently I watched a video, I don't remember exactly where, but I watched a video about how China is now taking a lead role in developing these, what are they, the smaller capacity, like 30 megawatts nuclear power plants. The ones that are basically produced in their factories, and then you can just deliver them straight up to where they're needed. This also has the added bonus to them that they can make nuclear warheads very quickly. Do explain that one, because I have no idea how that works.
Well, first of all, you come up against a dilemma because you can't really tell any country, not to develop nuclear energy for power generation. You can't, of course. They're more than welcome. And the benefit of nuclear energy in that respect is that it's cleaner than fossil fuels. Not totally clean. Obviously, you have waste to get rid of and things like that. But countries like France have invested heavily in recycling fuel rods and remaking them to get the most out of them before you have to, dispose of them in some way. But it still is, even with the nuclear accidents that have happened, of course they've happened, even with that, we need some kind of a stopgap to get to fusion. And fusion may take 25 more years. It's always around the corner, as they say. We need a stopgap to get there as far as energy generation. However, there are ways that you can do nuclear energy that does not allow you to make a weapon. You can't, you can actually make, certain things like a thorium cycle or something like that. It's a lot harder to make a weapon, not a dirty bomb. You can do that with anything that's radioactive, but an actual fission bomb, that you can do it in ways that's a lot safer and a lot harder to, breed things like plutonium, and that sort of thing. Any country that is just seeking energy may go with that cycle, or they may go with uranium and just simply not enrich anything, because you need all sorts of things to enrich uranium to be bomb grade. You need, centrifuges and all that stuff. And a lot of that stuff is very visible if you're doing it, so that, satellites and things like that can see the sort of activity that is consistent with, a nation developing, nuclear weapons materials. Nuclear energy is a double-edged sword. It can help us solve problems now, and it can be done, as you said, with China and a number of countries around the world, actually, companies from countries around the world that are looking into compact fission reactors. What I'm interested in is what happens if someone leapfrogs fusion, and that we don't know. So let me tell you.
I don't even. What could leapfrog fusion? Surprise me, John.
Oh, I'm going to surprise you even more. So here's the story. There is a defense contractor in the U.S., very obscure one, and their name rhymes with Blockhead Barton, and they developed about 10 years ago something called high beta fusion, right? And they were pursuing it, and they were openly looking for partnerships. They wanted a partner to go into this, and what it would have been is a compact bar type fusion. It's not a tokamak or a torus or anything. Bar type fusion that accomplished containment, magnetic containment, which is the big problem with fusion, not to get too technical. Anyway, they had a magnetic system that pushes the plasma back. The more it pushes, the more the magnets push back. Well, anyway, this project by Lockheed Martin went on for about 10 years, and I think they built 5 reactors, experimental ones, and didn't really say how successful they were. And then all of a sudden, everything shut up. And they said, well, we've ended that program. Well, did they? Because the military and any use of a 100 megawatt fusion reactor that works, that is only the size of a bus, meaning it's launchable into space, is simply too lucrative not to pursue. So whatever it is, it went dark, or maybe it stopped, maybe it didn't work. But yeah, Lockheed's high beta fusion was very interesting, and that is what I mean by leapfrogging, because had they been successful, fusion would have come out of nowhere. We're all looking at ITER and these sorts of experimental reactors, and all of a sudden somebody delivers one to market. That could happen because there are a lot of people very interested in this, because you want to make a lot of money. Fusion energy is going to do it. Whoever cracks that is going to be the world's biggest company. And that's what I mean, is that a black swan event could happen with fusion, where it just falls into our lap because we didn't know about the development, unless you were a specialist really looking into what companies are doing and who's looking into fusion. And it could come from anywhere. China could be doing this. It would surprise me if they're not. So I think that may be how fusion goes. And then our big mega projects like ITER, multi-nation attempts at developing fusion energy, will just simply get leapfrogged. Could happen. I'm not saying it will, but it could.
That is just really a bit weird, though. But about thorium, I think that in general, the Western world as it is, shouldn't we? Because if you look at this, China has been producing a lot of their reactors lately. I just wonder, why haven't we, if we want to push for a less nuclear armed world, but we can't, stop the nuclear power, why haven't we really be pushing for aiding other countries with their thorium reactors, which then, as you say, can't be used for producing weaponry?
The situational problem of nuclear energy is the reason, because let's take a smattering of countries. In the United States, it is titanically expensive and unbelievably difficult to build a new nuclear power plant. I think we did only just a couple in the last 20 years, and more shut down than what we built, because it's just simply too expensive for a electrical power co-op or company to invest the hundreds of millions of dollars needed to build a nuclear reactor. So we're dead on that count here. In more friendly countries to nuclear energy, like France, their resources are geared towards uranium. That's really the bottom line. So the really sad part of it is nobody's really looking into thorium, even though thorium is, I believe, in the Earth's crust 4 times more common than uranium. We have a lot more of it. So it is something for the future, but there isn't anybody leading the charge to push thorium reactors over the hill and get them deployed in countries that just simply want nuclear energy. Some countries don't need it because they're pursuing other means of doing it. For example, Kenya has a really impressive geothermal energy initiative going. So some people, like, if you're Iceland or Kenya, you can use something, inherent to the land that you're on. But also countries that, since thorium is so common, it's also mineable in more places. So you've got, that working for you. But the thing is, there's just no one leading the charge for it. Again, whenever you say nuclear energy, there is still a lot of people in opposition to it because, yeah, sure, nuclear accidents happen. But we're also in the position of climate change, then we need something cleaner than what we're using. It's that simple. Nuclear can be part of the package and really help things out and not put us in a position of rolling blackouts or those sorts of things.
Yeah, I've noticed that about nuclear power, even in Latvia. A lot of people, especially here in this in my region, it's even more difficult sometimes because my parents' generation remembers Chernobyl very well. Well, I was -3 years old then, so.
I was, Chernobyl was 1986, so I would have been around 11 years old, and I was living in Oregon in the U.S. Pacific Northwest at the time. I'm not from there, but we were living there. And the prevailing winds brought the Chernobyl power plant fallout across the Pacific and across the Pacific Northwest. And I remember having to stay in that day, because we didn't know how much radioactivity we would get. It turned out to be negligible. There wasn't anything there, but just a little bit of above background. But yeah, that I definitely remember Chernobyl very vividly, actually, because that was the first time being that age. I was like, what exactly is this? And I was aware, of course, of the Soviet Union and the Cold War and everything. But I think that was the first time where it actually really personally hit home, where I was like, holy mackerel. Because we were still doing, in those days, we were still doing nuclear drills in school. Not very often, but that was still going on, although it was sort of disarming by that point, not too much of it, because we actually had a dialogue with the Soviet Union by the mid-1980s, at least when Mikhail Gorbachev gained power. See, this is the interesting part, because you said you were 11, and I just remembered when I was 11, and because me and Evita, my wife, were watching King of the Hill recently, because I've only seen some episodes previously, and we just went and visited Texas for a honeymoon for a bit, so we were watching that, and they had an episode about Y2K, about that crisis, and I remember I was 11 at that time, so I had no panic. All I remember was that it was the biggest New Year's celebration ever with fireworks all over the place. But there was this panic about this Y2K happening around there, but it fizzled out pretty easily. But Y2K panic, I think, now is replaced by 5G
tower panic and COVID vaccines or something.
Yes, it's cyclic. With Y2K, that was a special case. Now, mind you, at the time of Y2K, I was about 25 years old, and I was working as a bouncer in a bar, if you can believe that, and an Irish bar, Irish pub. And yeah, there was definitely a lot of fear and hype and everything.
John, you are a man of many talents. Making violins, bouncing at the bar, being excellent at science and futurism, and an author? Man.
I have definitely had a varied assortment of careers, but the bar thing was actually a night job that I was doing to supplement income, and the fact that I got free Guinness. And so, yeah, that was a major perk, was free beer. Anyway, but I remember everybody was worried that night, and I was actually working that night, and it was, nothing happened. But the reason nothing happened is that all of the programmers and computer people and specialists and all of that worked to make sure there wasn't a problem. Okay, which wasn't really being talked about that much at the time, that there were actually people working on this to make sure that nothing bad happened. So there were only a few glitches here and there, but it's because we were prepared for it. Everybody knew. Now, there's also the phenomenon of people, conspiracy theories and things like that, where more is made of a problem than what's actually there. So now we still deal with this, where, circles sort of get it wrong. I don't want to go too far with that, because concerns are concerns, and a lot of them are legitimate, but the fact is that, you can get a sort of a hysteria around it too, that builds, that takes it further than what's actually there.
But I thought, I'm just putting this up because currently we are now worried about all sorts of hacking attacks and ransomware, and because that's the number one thing that came to mind to a lot of people when we think about the warfare of the future and how that's going to turn out. Because currently there have been hacks on both sides, and especially I'd like to mention Belarusian partisans here, who basically, disturb Lukashenko's ability to get involved in the war by literally hacking the train schedule things or something.
Really?
Yeah.
They throw the train schedule off to keep Lukashenko from attending meetings or something?
No, because Russian troops move through Belarus and they train there.
Right, of course.
Thing is, Lukashenko himself, well, Belarusians don't really like to call him the president these days. No one really believes he's legitimate since already 2020. So that's a bit of a mess there. I just thought, how do you think this hybrid warfare will develop? Do we have any stunning developments on that part? We all thought that every tank would be hacked, but now it turns out that no, you can't really directly hack FPV drones if you don't know their frequencies. And now we have I'm just amazed about how high-tech war has become, yet how opportunistic and low-tech it is at the same time. We have drones exploding ships. We have drones flying around, and we have drones that carry other drones now. And then we have drones with sticks, literally fighting other drones. And we have satellites with circular saws. It's kind of like anachronism, you see. In my mind, this whole situation, it is a far-fetched from the very high-tech war that we've seen in video games and movies, because we don't have, Russia, by the way, tried to make autonomous little track drones with machine guns on them, and that project failed miserably, as they're a super easy target for much cheaper and easier to use FPV drones. But it's just that all this time we thought that the hacking would be a much bigger part of this war than it actually is. You can hack a lot of stuff, but not necessarily all the tanks and everything. Current war looks like, I don't know, either a space marine wielding a sword, or imagine a classical Viking just give him an AK-47. We have to think in these analogies, don't you think? And that surprises me the most, that it's actually way more low tech than possible, but I guess it's economical and works. Maybe, I don't know.
The big point is that, again, sometimes the simplest weapon works the best. So look at what Russia's fielding. They're fielding T-72 tanks and things that even earlier. Well, they're entirely mechanical. You're not gonna hack them. It's like hacking a Jeep. You're just not gonna do it. But the thing is the artillery round coming out of that tank is what really matters. And you can do that with World War II. equipment or before, I mean, I don't know how possible. Actually, it would be possible because you can't stop it. So you could get an artillery field piece from 1862 and fire it at something. Nothing is going to stop that shell, unless you've got, some interesting, missile system that could intercept an artillery shell. And that is theoretically possible. Maybe someone's done it. Can't say. But the point is that some things just haven't gone obsolete that you think would have gone obsolete, but they haven't. The other thing is that with modern weaponry ideas like directed energy, that really requires a ton of energy. So how big of an installation do you want? Yeah, you could build a laser, but how big is the power source and everything else that you need to deploy it? And is that better and easier to use than, a howitzer? So those questions come into play we could do things a lot more high tech, but it doesn't mean it's going to be better. And that's why you have drones fighting each other with sticks, because it's effective, and effective is all you need.
Hi everyone, Annette here. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Eastern Border. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you who are supporting us on Patreon or via our website. Your financial support is really what keeps this show going, so thank you from the bottom of our heart. If you're not a Patreon and would like to become one, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/theeasternborder, or support us via our website, www.theeasternborder.lv. That said, hope you're enjoying this episode, and talk to you later. Bye!
I really have my context there, and I know that no matter what people say, Russia is not going to throw nukes. And that Budanov, the GRU guy, the person who runs the intelligence for Ukraine, he also supports this. However, that was the scary part. The sort of idea of tactical nukes. And I want to explain here, because a lot of people don't understand the fact that what the governments call tactical nukes, they're about the size of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those would be tactical nukes today.
Small, yeah. They're not world enders.
But they're scary. They kind of like, I like my BattleTech, right? There they banned all the nukes and everything, but then they kind of normalized. Once you start using tactical nukes, they're easier to use because they're smaller, but they're still, super deadly. They're still super weapons. And that scares me the most, the fact that these... I think that if we are to have nukes, we should build them really, really big. Like, to the size that we can use them for something else, say, even though that's a really bad idea, but at least if a world-ending asteroid would come or something, but tac nukes are just bad, in my opinion.
Well, deflecting an asteroid, if we have an asteroid cooking in, we could perhaps modify a nuclear weapon to be used to deflect it, although we don't seem to need that. Impactors seem to be quite capable of doing the job. There was an experiment, the DART experiment, where we actually deflected an asteroid with an impactor. So you may not even need it for that. But tactical nuclear weapons, as you say, they're small, and they're not going to end the world, which means that they're more likely to get used, which is scary. But I don't see that happening with this conflict, because it would seem to me, and I could be wrong, and I'm sure many people in the audience will say, well, he's off his rocker, but it just seems like it would be really, really expensive for Russia to use one, and economic effects afterwards. So use one, you may not see sanctions lifting for years, after using it, because you'd horrify the world by using one. And I am pretty well convinced that the Russian government won't go that far, because they know what the costs are, and they haven't done it yet. So the Russians know the implications of using nuclear weapons, as well as any nuclear armed nation, and they might saber rattle and all that, but I'm skeptical that they would use that, because look, Moscow's not in any danger here.
And they will not be in any danger whatsoever from, at least not from Ukraine and NATO. I think they might be in trouble from internal sources, like what's happening in Dagestan and Chechnya, where this ISIS-K is now much more popular. We've had record amount of terrorist attacks, which are just coming back and hitting Russia because they can't deal it with there. But yeah, I agree with you here. And also, let me remind you that they still call Ukrainians, the propaganda is that they are the brotherly people, you see, that they are the same people as Russians. Their argument is that Ukrainians are just as much Russian as, say, Bavarians or Swiss are German. And Bavarians, well, they are Southern German, but that's like saying that it's kind of the same situation as with, say, I don't know, Texans and the rest of the United States, or Bavaria and Germany. While it is not the case, but still, that's their argument. And that's therefore they also just won't nuke their own people, because then, there will be a lot of political consequences for this.
Well, it's situationally different for each country. So, for example, with Texas and the U.S., yeah, they're proud of their state. It's Texas. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. Don't mess with Texas. But we love them, and I'm a Missourian. We don't have really the same. We didn't invent chili or anything, so we haven't done very much interesting stuff. But Texas has. And so it isn't that it's a separation. It's just they have pride in their state. But at the end of the day, we're all U.S. citizens, and we just don't have that sort of separation. Did at one time in 1861, yeah, different story. But it today it's just we're just Americans. A place like Ukraine and Russia, it's a little bit different because there's a completely different history, as Vladimir Putin so eloquently and lengthily articulated to Tucker Carlson. That the history is very different, and both sides view it very differently. So I can't speak to it. I know the history of the area, but what the sentiment seems to be a lot stronger. It's a lot more divided, as it should, which is to be expected because there's a war on, right? As far as the propaganda, you can say anything. You can say anything. And I know they've used things like denazification as a motivation for the war, even though there are no Nazis present. You have to take it situationally. With the Germans in Bavaria, that's more like Texas and the U.S. The Bavarians are proud, and they should be, because they make wonderful beer and sausage and pretzels, and they have their own dialect of German. It's not always all that understandable to the rest of Germany. But they're like the Scots. They're like the Scots of Germany.
Yeah, I know, but the thing is, this is used. This is a false equivalency, because in Ukraine the situation is not like that. The language is different. Not just a different dialect, it's a different language. It's the same thing as how I like to explain to people that even though we are usually viewed together as Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, Latvians and Estonians and Lithuanians have zero mutual intelligibility at all. Estonians are way more Finnish in their language, and I can understand Lithuanians if I squint and think real hard about it, but to me they sound like basically people trying to speak while being drunk. It's quite difficult to explain this to people who just don't normally do all this.
I can give an analog in English. In Jamaica, they have Jamaican English, but they often also speak the patois, which uses a lot of English stuff, but it is just not mutually intelligible. So you will hear it, but you can't understand it if you're an American or a Briton. Another example would be, let's see, what English do I have trouble understanding?
Pakistani, Indian, I don't know. They are specific.
Yeah, those. There isn't a lot, but the Jamaican patois would be a good one. So there are. English is a lot more tighter, than Baltic languages. I guess the same thing happens between Slavic languages too, I would imagine. But anyway, the English is a lot tighter because, thank the British Empire for that. But it is amazing, though, that, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania are fairly small, but that there is that gulf. That's interesting.
Latvia sort of works like a glue together. Like Lithuanians are our ethnic relatives, because again, you have to think about Latvians and Lithuanians are ethnic relatives in the very exactly the same way as neighboring Native American tribes would be, because we are the tribes just of this region. Think of it that way.
Probably was once a time where it was more intelligible, whatever they were speaking.
Yeah, because it was tribal. There were nine Baltic tribal groups. A couple of them died out, like the old Prothedians. But from the remaining ones, that two countries were made, like northern Balts and southern Balts sort of squishing together, and now we have there's a lot of common words, but basically, yeah, that's how Latvia and Lithuania formed. And Estonians are just basically southern Finns, but they're culturally Baltic, which is interesting. They're ethnically Finnish, but due to historical reasons, they are culturally very much Baltic. But the same idea, by the way, in the totally weird, unrelated situation is what I expect from the future, because let's go back to that. Belarus also should be a Baltic country. That is why they're called Belarus. White Russians? But I have a very simple thing. If your national cuisine involves the pink cold beach soup that you eat in the summer as your number one dish, then you're a Baltic country. And that only happens in four countries. All three of us, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, because that originally is a Lithuanian invention, but we have all modified it. And then it happens in Belarus too. So White Russians, Belarus should actually be more, they were historically very much tied to Lithuanians. So I think in their future, when Lukashenko is gone, when Putin stops supporting him, I think we will start eventually speaking about the 4 Baltic countries, not just the 3 ones. But that's kind of a geopolitical hot take, but I have historical arguments for it. But talking about this, what do you think, besides, say, this whole war, what do you think are also other military challenges for this century? What should we watch out for? Like, there's civil war in Sudan, and I've heard that Ethiopia is building their dam and they're having their problems. What conflicts do you see might pop up for maybe reasons that we don't expect yet, these so-called black swans in the future? What do you think could be like the next big conflicts of the world?
The one that currently concerns me the most, that I'm not sure if it'll go hot or it won't, is of Venezuela. Venezuela basically had a referendum on whether they should invade the neighboring country, Guyana, and they, so there could be a conflict in South America. There are several points where that could happen, but the big one is the Guyanese or British Guyanese or formerly British, whatever, and Venezuela, just because Venezuela's saber rattling. So I could see one happening there. Now, of course, there are still open potential conflicts in Africa, Ethiopia being one of them. There's of course China and Taiwan. So yeah, world peace is not going to happen, not anytime soon. There could be future conflicts. I think that the situation with Ukraine will get settled, because it's gone on for quite a long time now, and how much more money does Russia want to spend? So I imagine 6 months to a year there'll be some sort of mutually acceptable peace talk that settles it back down, and there'll probably be an occupied zone, sort of like what happened with Georgia. So that's what I'm expecting and hoping for. I'm hoping that they can just put an end to it.
Well, yes, but on the other hand, it's really difficult to figure out what's going to happen. I really think Ukraine can push out Russians from all their territory, but that's because of how Russia has so much more resources, but their morale is lacking horribly, and right now the mobilized of the last, when they declared the mobilization, they're now demoralized, and I think they have I think internal issues will kind of hurt Russia more in the long run.
That's unpredictable. We don't know what they'll do. We don't know what will happen. But at the same time, no matter what, people don't live forever, and Putin's aging, so there will be a time when he's gone. What the Russians do is up to them, of course. Well,
depends on also what you call Russian, because right now with all the Caucasus people, Because that really also staggers me. I mean, I like to think of the world in a more globalistic way. To me, we're all humans first. Of course, I'm patriotic for my own country, Latvia, but I consider myself a member of the human race in general, because that's how you have to look at it if we are to survive in the long run. But it's just kind of weird how, at least in Russia recently, I've looked at and seen all these ultra-nationalist elements there. They don't want to give up, say, the Caucasus or other regions which are majority Muslim, but then they hate the Muslims who live in there. Do you see my point? And it's like, this is a different situation from say, the United States, because not like Chechnya and those Caucasus regions where right now, which they blame for all the terror attacks, and where terror attacks are, organized against Russia, they blame them for polluting Moscow with wrong ideas and all that stuff. Yet they don't want to give up the land. And these guys, they wanted out of Russia. They fought wars, if you remember the Chechen wars, to get out of there, and they didn't want to be part of all this in the first place. But it's just weird that you forcibly annex a territory full with people of very different culture and different religion, and then you are surprised that you have people of different religion and different culture in your country. I find that kind of weird.
Yeah, it is weird, and it's not really it's not normal. What you have to do is, in the modern age, is don't think in terms of territorialism. It's not the Napoleonic period here. You should think in terms of stability and maintaining economy in the status quo. It should be the age of trade. And the mistake is returning to a political order where territorialism is back. I would characterize it very simply, 1937 called and wants its politics back, Mr. Putin. So it still seems to be, this territorialism still seems to be the motivation behind the actions of the Russian government. But I don't think that's the future, because it just simply guarantees more wars and more, things like terrorism, I just don't see it as a sustainable, viable way for a country to exist by being expansionist. It's not the days of the Roman Empire anymore, even though they might call themselves Third Rome, which they do.
And that is all sorts of silly, because as great as Roman Empire was, it was still a very long time ago. But I remember reading, I think it was Mr. Gibbons who wrote this whole The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire book, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And he basically posted there that every big government wanted to be Rome, and every great leader wanted to be Alexander the Great. And if you look at it in the history, then it is so. I mean, that the European Union still wants to do that. And the United States uses a lot of Roman elements, especially, in your grand monuments of previous presidents. When is this going to stop, or are we taking Rome to the space age too?
I don't think we will. I think that the ideas of Rome obviously are reverberating through culturally, because they were just so powerful back then. And it was also seen, classicism was a thing, learning Latin and Greek. That's going to get less and less as time goes on, because we're moving in time further from the Roman Empire. We're not teaching Latin in schools, at least in the U.S., anymore. So I think that those ideas will get weaker with time, but certain institutions like republics and things like that, those aren't going anywhere. So, and those are, very Roman. But
well, let us hope that the republics don't go anywhere, because these times have proven that this whole situation can be kind of fickly. Besides, I don't still think that we can't come up with something better. I mean, that's a weird situation, but I really think that even the political philosophy will catch up with technology at one point. I think there's going to be some sort of fusion.
A slow rethink as technology changes the landscape of politics itself. Because if you have the injection of artificial intelligence, for example, just as a talking point, if you start having artificial intelligence advising, politically and changing things, transhumanism, if you want to go down that route, that's going to change politics, because you end up with a whole new set of issues, right? But that'll evolve, and it always has, because if you look at political concerns and systems from 150 years ago, they were very different from now. other than some expansionism, obviously. But as far as things like the concerns of somebody in 1850 were different than the concerns of today. And part of that, not all of it, but part of it was technology based. So we'll just evolve, and politics in 50 years will look different than they do right now. But politics right now looks different than it did 50 years ago. Let
me ask you this. What would be the optimal future that you would like to see? Like, and let's talk realistic. Star Trek is a bit too utopian, I think, at least by how the Earth looks like in Star Trek, which I found weird because I've only gotten into that by watching the Lower Decks. But standard classic Star Trek, it seemed to be just boring because of no conflict. And growing up in Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe, I really could not believe that we'll ever get a conflict-free planet after all. But so that has shaped my perceptions of the future. What you as a science fiction author, what's your most realistic yet ideal future that you would like to see?
Well, realistic is a future where everybody just maintains their autonomy, and governments and everything else, but they do it in an open, free, democratic system, and that immediately reduces war. And so if you have a planet full of nothing but open, free democracies of whatever brand or flavor people want, then that's going to be a lot more peaceful than oligarchies and, de facto monarchies and things like that, where you've got, the concerns of one person ruling everything rather than the whole. That would be the most peaceful future I would expect. Can we actually do it? Doesn't look like it at this point. I think we're probably gonna have another 100 years of strong men gaining power and, money and all these things that create the situations that we have. And it's up to those countries to do what they will, But ultimately, I think the next 100 years is going to be more of the same of what we're seeing right now. We'll probably have periods of relative peace again. And then we'll have, conflict periods like right now. But war never stops. There's always a war going on somewhere. And I just don't see that changing.
See, and although as much as I love the Fallout series, I'm a huge fan of the Fallout series, the whole saying war never changes, no, it actually does. It does quite a bit in various painful terms.
It changes, but it doesn't.
Just like everything with human history and human life. I mean, technology changes, our attitudes are weird. I remember, and I always use this as an example, that people who made the movie Gladiator, they had to cut some scenes out because they would seem too unrealistic for modern viewers' eyes, such as the gladiator is actually yelling out the advertisements for their sponsors, which happens. So,
but then again, I mean, Rome had the same ideas, and there was marketing. It existed back then.
Yeah, again, it's surprising how in a lot of these cases, these situations are modern. I just want to know if sometime in the future we have this chance that someone's going to look at this time at how we are now and think of us as some sort of post-Roman barbarians in the grand scale of things,
Well, when the AI starts calling us barbarians and saying, "You primitive humans, look at the mistakes you're making," that might throw a wrench in the works in how we think when we're getting berated by an artificial intelligence, a super intelligence that's smarter than we are, and saying, look, yeah, you're acting stupidly. Maybe that would be a wild card. I can't say, but at the same time, I am not convinced that that level of artificial intelligence or super intelligence is actually gonna happen. I don't think AI is scary, but we're not that close to this.
I was very interested about this. I wanted to ask you because as a last question to wrap up this conversation about what the future of all the horrible things looks like. I have heard that this AI, that the big tech companies are sort of cheating us in a way, with all these AI pins and AI systems, that's not actually true intelligence. That is just that it is really good at pretending to understand what's it doing. I kind of don't get it. And that some people say that this is just a new trend, just like big data was or something like that.
There's two senses that you could explore with this, and in one sense you're correct in that it isn't that smart. Like I said, there's a lot more development that needs to happen before it's going to get something close to actual intelligence. It is artificial intelligence. You can grant it that, but it's ultimately telling you what you want to hear, and it's doing it, through an understandable process, a known process that it was designed to do that. So we're not talking, HAL 9000 here yet. Not yet. Eventually, maybe. The pitfall, and this is the other avenue of thought, is that maybe we are overestimating what we are. We like to think of ourselves as human consciousness, and we're conscious, and it's not, and all this. But we don't actually know what that is. And it may be easier to recreate than we ever imagined. And all of a sudden, we get something that is artificially intelligent that equals us and does very human things. And we didn't expect it to do that. That could happen, and that's a risk. Or it never gets there, and the computer is completely incapable of being a human level intelligence. That could happen too. But right now, the real worry is in things like cybersecurity with AI and things like that. That's the real worry. Or deep fakes, that's the worry, but none of it is actually intelligent. And it's not there yet. It's not to the scary point as far as an existential crisis, but it is on a cybersecurity basis. That's a big problem. And it's, and also, again, deep faking and all the other things that AI does. And another one is in taking jobs, human jobs going to AIs is going to be a major issue as well, because certain jobs the AI can do better, or will do better. And we're seeing that. And futurists in the 1990s would have never predicted, I certainly would have never predicted that the first jobs that the AI would really begin to take over
Are artists, yeah. Weird.
Yep. We never thought that. We thought, they're going to be manufacturing. But no, it was the artists were the first to go. And if you would ask me in 1998 what I thought the most safest job was going to be, I would have said artists. So there you go. I was titanically wrong.
No, but the thing is that I rather say illustrators or making art for specific purposes, not just art for art's sake. No AI makes art for art's sake. They make commercial, basically commercial stuff happen. But then we just remember that what pays most of the artist's bills, which is, well, sad.
Well, the question is, with graphic design and things like that, it's going to do an increasingly better job. But can it be Pablo Picasso or Rembrandt or something like that and get the very intimate details of lighting and all of the stuff that are used by the artists? No, it's not going to get that because they're very human. So I guess you would say functional utilitarian art is going out, but actual masterpiece art is fine, I think.
I think so too. But to end all this episode today, John, please tell us about what people can expect in the remainder of this month on your show. Pretty sure a lot of people who listen to my show already know about you, but to those who don't, please explain to them what can they await on your YouTube channels and give us something maybe optimistic to finish off this whole episode, because after all, happiness is mandatory, and I'm spotting you, comrade. The raccoon is giving me information that you are not as happy as you could be.
I'll give you, yes, I will. Okay, here we go. The march of scientific discovery continues unabated like a steamroller, and we are discovering all sorts of new things. And I will be covering them on both channels as they develop and come in. There are scientific discoveries that happen every day, and there's no shortage of them to report on and invite scientists onto Event Horizon to talk about. And that, the march of technology forward, fundamentally, and for the most part, not always, is human progress towards something better.
I guess, but you're right. But what's the biggest? Okay, what's the new thing? What has happened the most recently that really has stunned you in the scientific developments?
I have a big one.
Okay.
A group of scientists, and I interviewed Dr. Ali Yazdani on Event Horizon about this. He's on the team. They created something that has been hypothetical for a century, and it's called a Wigner crystal. And it's matter made entirely out of electrons. And what they did was they sandwiched the electrons into between sheets of perfect graphene, perfectly constructed graphene, and they were actually able to create a Wigner crystal. When you're talking about things like electrons, they're very useful. So what technologies could come out of this now?
So as far as I get it, it's literally electricity made matter.
Yep. And it is it behaved exactly as was predicted, but now we've done it and it has been produced. And you can ask, okay, well, can you do this with antimatter? In other words, the positron. Turns out, yes. So that is the big one. There could be any number of future technologies that come out of this that may be mind-bending. I mean, even just ask about batteries. Well, what happens when you can make a crystal made out of electrons? So, yeah, that's the big one.
Oh, wow. I will definitely be listening to this, and I recommend that you do as well, dear listener. So, thank you, John, for being on the show. I'm sorry for this being a bit chaotic. It's just that while I was waking up, it's super late for John, super early for me, and it could have been a bit more organized. But I'm sure that Aneta will deal with this matter. But again, please consider supporting me on Patreon and John on his channels and everywhere. I'll post the links. Do svidaniya, tovariši. And once again, thank you, John, for being on the show.
Thanks again. I look forward to doing it again. And it's only 2:25 a.m. I'm just getting started.
Oh, well. Now that is good morale. Happiness is mandatory.
Thank you for listening to the Eastern Border Show. If you have any questions or comments, go to our website, theeasternborder.lv, and leave a comment there. Or email us at theeasternborder@gmail.com. We'll be sure to answer. You can also follow us on social media and contact us there. If you enjoyed this episode, then leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends about us. It really helps us grow the show. And remember, happiness is mandatory.